I'm already regretting even mentioning cats in this episode because now as the person who has to edit this, I have to look at clips of that movie, which pains me.
At least the infamous other cut doesn't really exist.
That cut. That one that I can't mention without being demonetized.
Just Google that.
Just Google alternate cut of cats and see what the top search result that comes up is. Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to the Behind the Screen podcast. I'm John Aljets, and with me once again this week is Owen Poole.
Hey, how's it going? It is good to be back. Thanks for having me on again. I have so much fun recording these with you.
Yeah, dude, it's always a good time. But this week, it's not just me and Owen. I'm also joined via Skype by Nadim Zaidi, a VFX artist who's worked on films such as Ad Astra, The Predator, and even a little bit on Blade Runner 2049, one of our personal favorites.
So my first name is Nadim, last name is Zaidi. Currently a VFX artist in the realm of digital matte painting, mainly for feature films and television.
This week, we are going to be talking about VFX, specifically how VFX doesn't always age the best.
Well, I think we're going to be more talking about CGI specifically.
Yes.
Because VFX have been around since the beginning of film.
Yeah, like, as I was saying, Nadim is a matte painter specifically, and matte painting is a type of VFX that's been around since, Charlie Chaplin's days. But
CGI specifically is somewhat new, and there's a lot of films that we feel use them kind of poorly, especially back in the day when they were like a brand new thing. And some of them, when you look at them 30 years later, you're like, oh wow, yeah, that's not good.
Yeah,
not great, Bob.
It's a bit of an issue. But all that being said, we're going to talk about that and more, both here on YouTube and on Spotify. All right, so we're going to be talking about CGI. There are some bits of CGI characters that just have managed to age well, while others really haven't. You look at an example of the first fully digital character ever created, which was the young Sherlock Holmes in 1985.
Stained glass guy.
The stained glass knight. It probably hasn't what you would call aged well, but within the context...
It was very groundbreaking at the time.
Oh, yeah. Within the context of, the fact that it was the first, it was groundbreaking, you can kind of give it a little bit of leeway. I would almost put that CGI that was done in 1985 on par with what we saw in Spawn.
Yeah, Spawn. So when you approached me about this episode and you mentioned Spawn, that movie is kind of forgettable, except for the for the CGI and VFX. I remember when I was a kid, I actually got my parents to somehow take me to that movie, despite how violent it is.
Having a pretty hard R rating.
Yeah. And I watched a few clips of it this morning before we recorded. And yeah, it's got some major issues that just pop right out of the screen immediately upon seeing it.
It just doesn't blend well into the environment. The lighting isn't even on most of the stuff. It
doesn't even match at all.
It just doesn't work, which is, it's funny because a lot of the effects in that movie were done by ILM, Industrial Light and Magic, one of the premier
to this
VFX
day
houses. So you just kind of got to wonder if that was budget or...
From the amount of research that we did, it seems like a budget issue. Obviously, we don't know unless we...
Could have also been a time crunch issue.
Which those often go hand in hand.
Yeah, because a lot of the... I think I read that it was about half of the visual effects shots were delivered 2 weeks before the movie debuted,
which is
insane.
That's absolutely insane.
That's almost borderline Cats level. Do you think that Cats is going to be one of these movies that we're going to talk about in a few years?
Oh, absolutely. We already talk about it now.
We're already talking about it not holding up now.
I mean, you got to feel for those VFX artists and those CGI artists. They just threw them under the bus. And if you look at the way that they shot that film, they just left it all to them. If you look at a character, a fully CG character like Gollum, and you look at the way they shot Cats, they could have just done it almost the same and had way better results, but they had to manually track a lot of these effects onto these actors' bodies because they didn't do full motion capture, I think.
Yeah, it's weird.
But Cats will definitely be one. It already is now. We're talking about it now in this episode. So
I'm already regretting even mentioning Cats in this episode because now as the person who has to edit this, I have to look at clips of that movie, which pains me.
At least the infamous other cut doesn't really exists.
That cut. That one that I can't mention without being demonetized.
Just Google that.
Just Google alternate cut of cats and see what the top search result that comes up is. But it's funny that you actually mentioned Gollum, from the Lord of the Rings. And a lot of times, we look at the Lord of the Rings and we think like, wow, that movie like definitely holds up. But Nadim actually had a differing opinion on certain parts of that movie.
This is going to sound sacrilegious to a lot of people, and please don't tar and feather me when I say this, but I feel some of the work in Lord of the Rings is starting to look pretty dated now. Now there's a lot of great environments and map paintings and excellent work on that film. Obviously, that's another one of those milestones in blockbuster filmmaking. But there are certain shots that are feeling kind of green screen now. And I think sort of that technology has kind of advanced in that regard. Often you can tell when certain characters are sitting in front of a green screen, for example.
As much as I kind of think that it's a little bit blasphemous to like speak ill of the Lord of the Rings films, he has a point.
He does have a point. It is kind of blasphemous to speak ill of those films because they're one of the few films that I can think of that have just grown in their adoration like over the years. Those green screen scenes I don't think are, for me, they're not as noticeable to me as the like Legolas action scenes, especially from Return of the King, where he like kills the elephant and he's it's flying
CG
around.
Orlando Bloom jumping around in Oliphant.
Yeah, like those. That's what stuck out to me the most because Lord of the Rings doesn't use CGI that much. When it pops up, it's just really noticeable.
Yeah.
And you forget how old those films are. Like they started, the Fellowship of the Ring came out in 1999 or 2000.
It was either 99 or 2000, but yeah, they were filming during the late 90s. And yeah, it very much was that they were using digital effects pretty sparingly. Like there was matte painting and stuff like that, obviously, that they did a lot of. But for the most part, it was a lot of practical stuff. And then obviously, like, there's a lot of CG in the battle scenes and stuff like that. And like today, I feel like if you look at the visual effects in Lord of the Rings isolated, yeah, they stand out and maybe don't necessarily mesh as well. But if you're in the moment and you're watching the movie, you don't notice it as much. Which is almost to me a hallmark of like really well planned out filmmaking.
Yeah, because they don't really draw, aside from the Oliphant scene.
Yeah, where it's like this is a big like set piece.
They don't draw that much attention to it. Like a lot of those battle scenes, it's like big wides.
Yeah,
you're not really highlighting the
fact that this one orc down here in the corner is made of like 6 pixels.
Yeah, and then you have something like The Mummy Returns, where they have a big sequence to show off. Look at how kind of awful The Rock looks as a half man, half scorpion.
Which I feel like The Mummy Returns is another one of those movies that when you're talking about bad CGI or just CGI not aging well, that is a movie that is going to constantly get brought up. I know that Corridor brought it up in their VFX Artists React.
And they did a whole video
fixing it.
The
CGI, yeah.
Great video.
But I feel like that is a great thing to bring up because you can directly compare the effects from The Mummy Returns to its predecessor, The Mummy, which also used pretty heavy use of CGI. But to me, there was nothing about the CGI in the original Mummy film that stands out.
Yeah, the only thing in the original Mummy that really sticks out to me is the like scarab swarm.
Yeah,
that looks a little janky, but
and the sandstorm kind of looks a little jank.
But given the time period, I think it holds up quite well, especially in comparison to its sequel, which is kind of strange.
Well, and like if you're talking like the sandstorm like mummy face, compare that directly to the like tsunami wave with the mummy face in it that was in The Mummy Returns. And you might want to chalk that one up just to the fact that water effects are like kind of hard to do.
They are hard.
And so making believable looking water is even today very difficult.
Back to the Scorpion King reveal. I mean, that's the part that sticks out to everyone because they made a big deal about like he comes through this like darkened like tomb and they really show him off to the camera.
It's like, oh, look, we got the Rock.
And that's why it sticks out so bad in everyone's minds, because the filmmakers decided that we are going to emphasize this CGI character, when in something like Lord of the Rings, it's not as heavily emphasized besides from that one sequence that I keep harping on, which isn't that big a deal.
Okay, so you brought up very briefly the idea of like why some of these VFX might not age well, obviously. And Nadeem brought up why he thinks the CGI for Blade Runner 2049 will probably age really, really well, which got us into a bit of a discussion about how that might be a reason why some things don't.
One example that I think of that is just like such a really good example of good integration of VFX with, practical setups and environments would have to be Blade Runner 2049. First of all, the environments, the cityscape feels real. Like it feels like a lived-in world. And I understand, I didn't know it at the time, but I knew afterwards that they had also shot some miniatures for a lot of the cityscape shots. So sort of the buildings that appear in kind of the midground to foreground, some of them were actually miniatures. And then a lot of it obviously was done in VFX post-production. So you have a lot of virtual environments and CG environments and matte painting work that adds that extra touch to push it to photorealism. But I didn't realize it at the time. But yeah, there was a lot of practical work done on that film. And it shows, it helps. The hybrid between the two can produce some really fantastic results.
That's a pretty solid point when you really stop and think about it.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about this before, just in our own like personal discussions. One director that immediately comes to mind is David Fincher.
Yeah,
because all of his effects are invisible. Do yourself a favor and watch a David Fincher film like VFX reel, because you watch it and you're like, what? Why did they even need to do that? And a lot of it comes down to time.
Yeah,
because if you're able to just effect in a CGI in the landscapes and environments you want to be shooting in, and you can do it well enough, like he can and his production team can, then you're going to save yourself a lot of time, which keeps you under budget.
Yeah, but I mean, the main point that I want to take away from this is the idea of grounding your VFX with some physical element.
Yeah, like all of his, like if they have like houses and whatnot, and they have all the backgrounds are like kind of not real, but the set itself is obviously real.
Yeah, or like as Nadeem brought up in 2049, it's a mixture of, you got matte paintings, you've got digital elements, and then you've got the miniatures. Which miniatures, that's I almost feel like that's a dying art that I want to see more and more of in films. Back the old Star Wars films just mastered miniature work.
But speaking of grounding elements, one of the films that we didn't talk about earlier, which actually came out well before a lot of the films we talked about, was Jurassic Park.
Yes.
Which is usually something people will bring up talking about effects that just age super well, because you watch that movie today and those look like real dinosaurs.
That really works because you're seeing CG dinosaurs alongside animatronic dinosaurs. Like the digital team had this physical element that they could use as a basis to be able to then grow their, digital creations off of. Compare that to something like the VFX in Jurassic Park 3, where there wasn't an animatronic Spinosaurus. That Spinosaurus doesn't look as good as the T-Rex in Jurassic Park 1, which was like 10 years before.
But, it just goes back to what the directors have in mind when they go into making a film, because as technology gets better, you're able to do more things with CGI. And when you're back in 1993 making Jurassic Park, you kind of need those practicals if you want to make it look halfway decent.
Yeah.
But if you're making a film, a decade later, you have more CG tools available to you. So maybe you decide, maybe we don't really need to do those practicals. We'll just make it look good in the CGI. And then that's when it starts to age, because obviously computer technology in 2003 was so much more limited than it is now. It just gets better every single year.
And that's an interesting thought, because that's another thing that in the discussion with Nadeem that we sort of touched upon is the idea of maybe, as technology gets better, our bar for what is good CGI gets higher, and that causes what came before to have to be measured up to sort of the modern effects. It just doesn't work as well.
I think that's a really good point, because you look at something like Avatar, which at the time was like mind-blowing.
Yeah.
The way the CGI was. And then you have similar motion captured character work in the newer Planet of the Apes prequel films. Those characters are harder to pull off because
they're covered in fur.
They're covered in fur, and you know what an ape looks like, and then you have these, the entire alien planet. And I would argue that the Planet of the Apes movies look better than Avatar only, a handful of years later.
Do you feel like the Planet of the Apes films coming out and looking better, do you feel like that negatively affects the way that you look at Avatar?
I don't think Avatar specifically, just because...
Although, here's an even bigger question. Have you watched Avatar?
I have not watched Avatar. That's the thing about Avatar, is that I'm not going to avoid watching it because I think the effects aged poorly. I'm not going to watch it just because I don't really care for that movie that much.
Yeah. I feel like you're not alone.
Quick aside, staggering how little cultural impact Avatar has, considering it was, until very recently, the highest grossing film of all time.
Kind of makes you wonder what sort of effect the Avatar sequels will have, if any. Number 2 will probably do gangbusters at the box office because people will be like, I want to see what this is because it's taken so long. After that, I don't think it's going to have any major impact on things.
I'll give James Cameron the benefit of the doubt. But we were talking about a budget a little bit earlier.
Yeah.
And I think probably for me the most obvious example of where budget came head to head with bad or aging poorly CGI was the Justice League with the mustache, the famous mustache. The first shot of that movie, they decide to do like the cell phone video of Superman talking to those kids.
Somebody watched Spider-Man Homecoming and thought that was a good idea.
Right off the bat, it's like, oh wow, like, at least for me, I know that some people, it wasn't as noticeable big of an issue for them, but for me, instant I saw it, I was like, I am in uncomfortable, uncanny valley territory in the first 60 seconds of this movie.
Yeah, as soon as I saw it, I was like, that is not Henry Cavill's face.
And for me, like, what I observed almost immediately was whatever skin tones they put over his mustache to try and blend with the rest of his face was a little floaty. It's going to be really hard to make that look natural. Famously, the studio didn't really want to spend any more money on this movie because they already sunk so much into it and they needed to get it out by a certain time. So, you do all these reshoots and you don't want to push back the release date of your movie and they can't afford to pay all your artists overtime, then that's what you're going to wind up with. Yeah,
you're going to wind up with VFX that just doesn't look that great. And we mentioned Spawn at the beginning and, we kind of budget and time, I feel, go hand in hand often. And like whether that was the case of, either inexperience or just not having enough money to throw at the effects for such an effect heavy movie.
It's not cheap to do.
It just didn't turn out the way that they needed it to.
I'm not going to say that the artists who worked on Justice League was bad at their job.
No, like I don't want anyone listening to this to think that we're like bashing on the VFX artist's work. Like we understand that there's a lot of like different circumstances that can kind of cause your work to either not reach the level that you feel like it can, or just you don't have the time to reach that point. VFX is an art. It takes skill to craft no matter at what level. So this is more or less just like a discussion of like, hey, almost what could have been done to help these things age a little bit better. And, in this case, we're talking about throwing more money and time at it.
Money and time.
It makes the world...
Two things that are hard to come by.
And they make the world go round. So, okay. We're talking last section here about what might have caused these things to not age super well, which brings us into sort of the meat and potatoes of this discussion. Should studios go back and fix badly aged CGI? Update it, whatever. Just make it look better.
I'm sure you could hire Corridor Digital to do that for you.
Oh, I'm sure. And they've already done it in a few videos. But, that is a topic that quite a few people have asked. And in some circumstances, I could see it being a good use. But Nadim made a really solid point about his opinion on film.
Oh, no, I don't like that at all. Because I feel like films are they're kind of a record of the time that they came out or the era. And this brings up the whole George Lucas Star Wars special edition thing, where, does he, as a director, have a right to go back and manipulate his films to sort of modernize them? And he has the right. He did own the rights. I don't know if he can do that now, but sold them off. But I think for me personally, I always like to view the original version. It's weird. It's sort of, you look at the Star Wars Special Edition now, and they come out in '97, and they have not dated well. Some of those shots, the Jabba the Hutt stuff, the dance number in Return of the Jedi. I mean, I still much prefer the original versions to those movies. Whether I'm seeing garbage mats in a shot or, black lines around the compositing, it doesn't matter. To me, a film is a record of the time that it came out.
That right there, I think, at least for me, that hits it right on the head. Film is almost a time capsule of when it is put out.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. You have certain limitations of film. Like, you wouldn't go back and add dialogue to a Charlie Chaplin film.
No.
Like, you wouldn't add that to a silent film because that is the era in which it was made, and they had to work within these limitations of not really being able to record dialogue for your film. So,
unless you're George Lucas. Like, I feel like if George Lucas was around in Charlie Chaplin's time, he would have gone back and added in dialogue.
put in all the dialogue.
Because Nadeem did bring up the Star Wars special editions, and he did bring up the fact that, now that's all you can get. You can't really check out the original versions of this. And this is something that
we harped on this before.
We harped on this a couple episodes back. The director's cut episode, we did actually dive into the discussion of, getting a hold of the original cuts of the film. And I feel like that is sort of the main issue with the idea of studios going in and fixing up old CGI, is you've got to be able to, if they're going to do that, fine. There are some circumstances where I'm like, okay, if it's going to be something super subtle, like fixing up the green screen in Lord of the Rings, I wouldn't even probably notice, like, the green screen stuff.
Yeah, I don't think I would notice it either.
But I would still want to be able to access the original cuts of those movies.
Yeah, that's the key for me. I mean, I think monetarily, it's definitely in the studio's best interest to fix up old CGI. You have anniversary editions of films coming out.
Is there anybody out there scrambling for that, like, 25th anniversary Blu-ray remaster of Spawn?
Well,
I feel bad. I feel like we've been really taking the piss out on Spawn this entire episode.
Sorry, Todd McFarlane.
Sorry, dude.
But
hope your reboot works.
Maybe not Spawn specifically, but you have various versions of Star Wars out there. You have various versions of Lord of the Rings out there. I could absolutely see studios making profits on, paying some VFX team to go in and make slight changes and maybe put in a few more extra features, repackaging it into some kind of anniversary Blu-ray and making decent money off of it. I think that's probably in their best interest. I don't know all the finances, obviously, but if they want to do that, make sure that those original versions are accessible to your audience.
Yes, and that was I feel like that was your entire thesis of the director's cut episode, was please just make sure that I can watch the original theatrical cut.
If I want to watch, the original theatrical cut of Lord of the Rings with the slightly off green screen
and the bad CG Orlando Bloom,
that should be my choice as a consumer of film.
Yeah, agreed, 100%. Okay, so if we're seeing studios upgrading the CGI and stuff, basically we're asking for access to the originals and maybe do it subtly. Don't necessarily do anything flashy. Maybe don't do the George Lucas. I'm going to add in CG
banthas in the foreground.
Banthas and
for no reason.
This very impressive swooping shot of Mos Eisley that wasn't originally there, or bad CG Jabba the Hutt. There's another example of CG that didn't age well.
Yeah,
Jabba the Hutt in A New Hope. That did not go well.
Never looked good. I'm sorry.
Or most of the prequels, actually. I'm sorry, but most of the CG in those just don't look good.
Yeah, to me the originals look better.
Yes.
Because they did miniatures and all those things. But yeah, the Star Wars Special Edition's not subtle in their quote unquote upgrades. I wouldn't be shocked if, since George Lucas isn't in charge of those anymore, maybe it'll be less likely for this to happen, but I wouldn't be shocked to have special editions with nicer looking Jabba the Hutt in that sequence, and nicer looking Mos Eisley. And
I feel like at this point we might as well just keep updating it and just keep making it look better, because we've already done it. Just keep upgrading it at this point.
But is it really upgrading?
Maybe. I don't.
I guess it just depends on, does something does some kind of CGI element that doesn't really hold up really affect your viewing of a film.
That's true.
You know, we talked about Spawn a lot, and if I watch Spawn, I watched a bunch of scenes from Spawn, and it wasn't really, I was looking for the CGI, obviously, because we were talking about it today. But the reason I don't really want to go back to it is because the story isn't very good, and it's just a kind of mediocre film. It's not that the CGI is going to hurt my eyes from watching it.
If you're listening to this podcast and you worked on Spawn, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm at Bender Waffles. I will give you the opportunity to come on this podcast and defend yourself. And defend this movie.
But, you know, like that's not the reason that I'm not going to watch Spawn again.
Yeah. It's not the CGI that's stopping you.
Yeah.
Just like the CGI is not the thing that you're watching The Lord of the Rings for.
Exactly.
You know, I'm not watching Jurassic Park for the dinosaurs. Well, I mean, I'm watching it for the dinosaurs, but I'm not watching it for the CG dinosaurs.
I think it's perfectly valid if you're the kind of person who will see some kind of effect and it takes you out of the film and it negatively impacts your viewing experience, then yeah, it's totally valid. But that's just whether it affects your experience enough to do that. And do you want an updated version that makes it less obvious and might improve your experience? I don't know.
So there's definitely benefit to doing it, and it's not like a don't ever do it, don't touch our movies, blah. Like it's just, you know, maybe do it with a bit of a, you know, soft touch.
Just give me access to the original version, because that might be the one I want to watch. It might not be, but to take away the options I think is bad, and don't do that.
I think if it's done unintrusively, like Star Wars Special Edition was pretty intrusive. It was designed so that the audience felt like they were getting something new for the money they were paying. Whereas I feel like if it's just a subtle update, if it's removing small little thing here or a speck there or fixing the maybe depth of field of the shot or something, I think that's okay. But when it comes to manipulation to the point where you're adding completely new elements into a shot or adding completely new camera moves before a shot starts, for example, I think that's a little much.
Now, Owen, if someone were want to watch the original version of your Twitter feed, where would they find you?
They would find it at @OwenScott_P. If you want a lot of my takes on the Portland Trailblazers, and I am working on my YouTube channel, which is just Owen Scott Pool. Look that up. Not a lot up there right now.
But what's up there is good. You might even see me in one.
The pandemic is hard for
everybody.
For everybody.
Do you know who else it's hard on? Me, Owen.
It's hard on everybody.
And it's been hard on my YouTube channel, which is over at Bender Waffles on YouTube. You can also follow me on Twitter at Bender Waffles, BenderWaffles. Yes, it is a reference to Futurama. Also, if you want to see what my other guest, Nadim, has going on, you can check out some of his artwork over on his Instagram. He is at NadimZ_art. That's NADIMZ_ART. And if you're somebody who worked on Spawn, get in contact with me and we'll get you on the show. It'll be great. I think that would be hilarious to do a Spawn roundtable.
Spawn roundtable.
Like, just get a whole bunch of people who worked on Spawn, get them in here, I'll moderate, and just have them just rip me apart. I'll show them some of the short films and stuff that I've worked on, and they can just tear into those.
Oh, Spawn is infinitely better than any short film I've ever made.
I'll just show them Dirty Blood and just let them tear it apart.
I can't take any more of this sentimental crap. Come on.
What do you think? Are there any movies that you think the VFX aged just really poorly on? Do you have any idea why it might be? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and while you're down there, why not consider subscribing to YouTube or following us on Spotify? Thanks for listening, and stay safe out there.